brief little bio. Mattie Boom has been a curator of photography at the Rijksmuseum since 1994. She was previously the photography curator at the Netherlands Office for Fine Arts in The Hague and organized exhibitions on 19th century photographic art and Dutch post-war photo books, among others. She was one of the founders of the Netherlands Photographic Society, and in 2007 she collaborated on a national project called Dutch Eyes, a critical history of photography in the Netherlands. In 2019, she published Everyone a Photographer, The Rise of Amateur Photography in the Netherlands, 1880 to 1940, which has a really fantastic cover, I have to say. Hans Rooseboom started working at the Rijksmuseum in 1991 and began working with the photography collection in 1993 when he began cataloging the photographs held throughout the museum to prepare for the state photography collections of the 19th century being transferred to the Rijksmuseum. Rooseboom wrote a collective biography of early professional Dutch photographers working between 1839 and 1889 called The Photographer's Shadow. He also published What's Wrong with Daguerre, Reconsidering Old and New Views on the Invention of Photography, and Electricité, 10 Advertising Photographs by Man Ray. The Rijksmuseum officially started collecting photography in 1994, and in 2014, the museum created a separate gallery for photography. Hans and Mattie have together organized many exhibitions there, including Modern Times, Photography in the 20th Century, New Realities, Photography in the 19th Century, and Ed van der Elsken, Crazy World. They are now preparing an exhibition and book on the history of American photography, scheduled for February 2025, which will be the culmination of some 18 years of collecting American photographs for the Rijksmuseum. So, Hans and Mattie, I know that you're in the midst of putting this exhibition together on American photography, but I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about what you're including and whether any kind of themes have emerged or particular subjects have come into focus as you've been putting it together. I have a couple of images that I think will be in the exhibition, including this Brian Schutmott from 2010, and then I'll show in a few minutes some earlier American tintypes, which I think point to the breadth of the show.
Well, it's fairly impossible to cover the whole field of American photography to start with, so but we didn't want to end there. And we knew the first question anyone would pose is what would define American photography, which is, again, I think, impossible to answer. So, like we did before, we simply wanted to show good photographs, in this case from the States, which is a very rich field. Photography has been collected in the States on a large scale much earlier than in Europe, so there are many, many photographs in museums, libraries, archives that we simply had to visit in order to see them and to discover the whole breadth of American photography. So we did indeed choose some themes to organize the whole exhibition around, but don't expect, let's say, 200, the top 200 photographs that everyone already knows. Like we always have done before, we tend to choose photographs that neither us ourselves did see before we came across them, and maybe all of you haven't seen either. So it will be, I think, full of surprises, and here and there a known masterpiece by people like Robert Frank or Diane Arbus, but maybe 3/4 of it will be by anonymous or lesser known photographers that we even didn't know before seeing them either on the market or in some libraries or museums depot.
Yeah, so even today we were hunting for photographs to add to the exhibition, and we will have to trim it down because now we have a PowerPoint with, let's say, 800 images, I guess. So we will have to trim it down.
A little bit.
Yeah, yeah. But it will be high and low. So not only the masterpieces, not only the highlights, but show the whole range of American photography, all the applications and so on.
Yeah. And I think that's the adventure of collecting photographs. I mean, if we compare ourselves to our colleagues who are in the paintings department, try to find a new Rembrandt or a new Van Gogh, that's hardly possible. But what we do is we go out, well, literally not every day, but once you go out, either to a fair or to a dealer or to a collector, you will find stuff that you've never seen or never realized it was there, has been made. So that's really the adventure and thrill of collecting photographs, and that's what we want to show to the audience as well in 2025.
Maybe you can give just a sort of an overview of the Rijksmuseum's photography collection. I understand that it's sort of 10 broad categories, collecting categories, and I know that one of them is botanical photographs, and that you have a very significant collection of work by Anna Atkins. So I just wanted to show that, but also maybe talk a little bit about the collection, how things are organized.
Yeah, I just have a small correction about what you were telling about the collection. The Rijksmuseum already collected photography in 1975 because our Dutch history department, our colleagues are over there, they started giving photo commissions to document life in the Netherlands, all sorts of aspects of life in the Netherlands. So this has mussed up to a collection of, let's say, 5,000, 6,000 photographs since the 1970s. So that's a very interesting body of work. But it was always kept somewhere in the cellar, and when we started collecting photography in 1989, so the 150th anniversary, then it became clear that the Rijksmuseum wanted to collect photography and add photographs to the print room. Then we took these photographs of the Dutch history department out. There were a lot of albums as well from the colonies and so on and so on. And we started to find things in our own backyard. We found wonderful masterpieces which were kept among the prints and drawings. So after a few years, after a period of, let's say, 4 or 5 years, it turned out we had a proper photo collection. And what were we adding? We were first adding, for the 19th century, mainly French photography, and then after the year 2000, when the museum was renovated and we would go into the 20th century as well, we were allowed to go collecting 20th century photography as well, which is of course great because it's ridiculous to stop in the year 1900. And we've added wonderful things. So Hans has been looking for the Atkins to add to the collection for ages, and then suddenly a beautiful album popped up. So Hans, tell something about it.
Well, the Atkins is a special case. I mean, she was the very first woman photographer in history. She compiled this book between 1843 and 1853. So it took her 10 years to make this book. All in all, I think there are about some 18 copies known only. She may have made 25 or 30. We don't know how many copies she made. They all differ, and they are quite rare because quite a few of these 18 copies that we now know are in British collections, mainly in London. So only once every 10 years, maybe a fine copy will come onto the market. So, well, it was like waiting and hoping that we would be able maybe to acquire that one. And well, back in 2016, we indeed succeeded in acquiring a fine copy of the Atkins book. So I think we are the only ones on the continent who have one. Or there's one in Paris as well. But at least it's beautiful. I mean, it's very old. It made some 175 years ago, but it's as fresh as if made yesterday. And some are really stunning images in the book. So that was maybe one of the best acquisitions we did in the past 25 years that we have been building the collection.
Yeah, so let's say we have approximately 300, 400 acquisitions each year. So that could be a larger body of work of a photographer or loose examples of beautiful photographs. Right. So, yeah. Right. So it's been growing and growing, and now it's a very large collection. And for the last, let's say 10, 12 years, we've been focusing on American photography. First it was for the 19th century French photography, and then we decided, because the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam on Museum Square also collects 20th century photography, and we made a sort of an arrangement that they would go for Russia, Eastern Europe, and we would do American photography. Yeah, so that was a new focus for us, and we were very pleased we could focus on American photography. Yeah. Yeah.
So you had sort of a proper photography collection already within what was already...
Yeah, so the Dutch history collection was of course there. And there were many albums focusing on economic activity in the colonies, so in the Dutch Indies and a few Suriname. And so these were wonderful collections, and things were added. And then over the years we focused more on 20th century photography, and found a lot of new things as well in our own collection, because one of the state collections also contained 20th century photography. So we have a wonderful Man Ray, a wonderful Edward Weston, and you can name the whole canon, and it's in that collection. So we really had to dust all these photographs and see, okay, what it's worth. Is it a later print or an early one, or what do we like the image? And so that's how we, more or less made a whole new house with all sorts of rooms and focuses, and did some decorating of the house and filling things in, and but the main focus for the last years has been American photography. But we have a wonderful library. If you are ever in Amsterdam, come and visit. There were wonderful books on the shelves, and we knew that they were there because we could read it in the inventories of the library. And so we took them all out, and they hadn't been out since the late 19th century, so in a mint condition, more or less. And so we had a lot of fun. For instance, we went to Paris to buy a Charles Aubry, and we were thinking, ooh, 20,000 guilders, that's a lot of money. And then we returned, and our old documentalist, he had handed us over a large portfolio, and he said, this is what we found when you were in Paris. And so 9 Aubry's came out, huge ones, and used by the art schools, which were housed in the museum. So they were in the attic of the Rijksmuseum, and there all the people were trained, and these were piles of photographs which were lying around with coffee stains and and drawings on it, and so that was a nice collection. So of course the focus is mainly international. So like our print room collects not only prints and drawings by Rembrandt and Dutch artists, but also Dürer or Goya or whatever. And now we continue into modern times, with photography.
I did want to show this one because it's kind of a special piece in your collection, the Gustave Le Gray.
That was one of the things we found in the portfolios,
Really?
prints and drawings, Middle East.
Oh my God.
And I remember I had been to a training here in the United States, and going to the Getty and seeing all their Le Grays, because I wanted to see as much as possible. And then I came back, same story as with the Aubry's, and there it was, the signature. And when our colleague of the Bibliothèque Nationale, Sylvie Aubenas, she did her research, and she also came to our collection. And it turned out to be the only one of Baalbek in the whole world. No, in Amsterdam, just kept in the portfolios for ages, and no one knew it was there. So it's a large wax paper print of 2 paper negatives pasted together. So if you look closely there among the stones, you can see the line of the division. And it's a
Right.
wonderful piece. It's a wonderful piece.
That's
So we're,
amazing.
yeah.
I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you work together as a team to decide what goes in the collection. And a little bit beyond that, you both seem to have a real interest in vernacular photography and in how photography functions out in the world as well as in a museum or a gallery. So when you're looking for things like that that are maybe, you know, beyond the usual suspects, I'm assuming you're looking in places that are beyond the usual places. One example, I think, was this. You recently acquired this collection from the Stephen Joseph collection of advertising photography, and this particular piece I thought was just great.
It's a stunner, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we started in 1994, we were, even if it's 25 years ago, or more than that, we were relatively late to the field, and to be honest, we didn't have the deepest pocket, so we had to think and act and collect a bit differently from all the other major and older museums who started much earlier. So that well, maybe it was afterwards a blessing in disguise that we had to find other things that others would maybe overlook or tend not to focus on. So one of the fields that we discovered for ourselves was early commercial photography and early scientific photography. And here we see a fascinating piece from 1897, I think, just a year after X-rays had been discovered by Röntgen. And it's a British photograph trying to prove that when you, even if you would ride through, well, whatever it is, you would be able to keep on riding. And I remember having seen it at Swan many years ago in their catalogs, and then this British collector in Brussels, Stephen Joseph, happened to have it, and he donated it to us for the new reality show that we did in 2017. And that's maybe the main difference with private collectors. They are able to focus on one field, and we have to divide our time over, well, both the 19th century, the 20th century, 21st century, Dutch and foreign, applied photography, high art, fine art photography. So we are trying to cover the whole thing, which is impossible, but it's fun to try. So we are taking bits from nearly everywhere. But indeed, we do cover certain fields, including vernacular photography, although it's quite popular elsewhere as well. But we have always been interested in how photographs have been used by people, or why they have been commissioned, or what the hidden agendas behind them are. So it's not only about the image itself, although that plays a big role in our decision making, why to choose certain photographs, but the story behind it can be very important as well, and can show how photography has been used. And that's the main difference with high art. It's not just art, it's much more than that. I mean, the fine art part of photography is just a very tiny part of the whole field and all the other applications. So we had to look elsewhere, and then we found out it's maybe even more fascinating to do so than only focus on the canonized part of the fine art photography.
Right. Well, speaking of the story behind the photograph, I think this is for you, Mattie. I was so fascinated by this. So it's called Eva Penninck and her son Burkhard, and she, I think, was a photographer and editor, right? But
yeah, it's a fascinating story because we acquired from Deborah Bells. It might well be also here been acquired at AIPAD's. A wonderful photograph of a woman en face by Blumenfeld, Erwin Blumenfeld. And it had a stamp of his Amsterdam address on the back. So I went to one of my elder informers in Amsterdam, and I said, this could well have been a woman of Amsterdam, and if so, we should be trying to find out. So he said, you should go to Eva Penninck and ask her. And Eva then was, I think, 94 or something. So I went to her house, which is near the museum, and she opened the door, and I thought, Jesus, maybe she's the woman. She wasn't the woman, but she had been photographed by Blumenfeld, and she didn't know who the woman on the photograph was. But then she had this a huge table filled with scissors, glue, and she was making collages all the time. And she started doing that in the 1930s. So we became more or less friends. And then I said, why don't you donate your albums to the museum? And so we got her albums, and they were wonderful. She was a fashion journalist, and so she traveled around a lot. Visited her sister here, who lived here in the United States. So these are wonderful collaged women's albums, and yeah, they're wonderful, and so they're now part of the collection. And she used all these Kodak type of slogans, you know. So a beautiful man wanted, or here, no more babies, or so that's the type of sort of sarcasm which comes in on these album pages. So that's one of the things I still have to do, write an article about her and what I know about her. But it's fascinating stuff, yeah.
It really is.
So she started doing that around 1930 or something. And there are Blumenfeld cutouts as well in her albums. So it's great stuff.
So they're not just necessarily personal photo albums, but they're collages that
Yeah,
are
each page is a collage on its own.
on its own, yeah.
And of course there are a lot of albums around, and people tend to ask, because that was also the topic of my PhD, where do you draw the line? And then I said, well, the image has to do the work. So first the image, and then we will see, and it's fascinating if you have all these stories behind it, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing about having pieces like this in the collection, is the way how important photography is, how it's used, but also how important it is to us, you know, individually in our families, and it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and now when we have, of course, this little hype of looking more into women's art, and here it is. So it's already in the collection. Yeah.
I had asked if there was a particular photograph or a photo book that recently came into the collection that was particularly exciting, and Hans sent me this, which I had never heard of before. It's a photographic automobile map. And it's amazing. I had never heard of it before, but when you sent me the image, I went down a complete rabbit hole looking these up, because they're so fascinating. It's like kind of an early Google Images sort of thing. Also, as someone who's notoriously bad at reading maps, I feel like this would have been so great for me. But so can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah.
And where you found it?
I first saw it in a book by David Campany, The Open Road. It was simply one of the illustrations in his book, and I was, wow, they did exist around 1905 till 1909, that when you went out by car, you had to use these guides to get wherever you wanted to go to. And then we found one copy in the New York Public Library, which was great to see a whole original copy. But they seem to be quite rare. I tried at eBay and elsewhere to find a decent copy, and only a few weeks ago I found an American dealer who had it on his website, so I ordered this copy, and it just came in by mail just before we left for New York, I guess a week ago. And I think they only made some 30 copies. It was a Chicago-based publishing firm who did these little guides between 1905 and 1909. And so every page has 4 photographs with the little arrows. Here you have to go to the left or to the right. And you have to realize that back then there were no numbered highways, there was no road signs to guide you wherever you wanted to go to. And there were hardly any paved no highways at all. So it was really an adventure, I think, to take a car from either Chicago to New York, and it's all around Chicago. But it's a fascinating genre, and I mean, it's loudly printed, but it's all about, well, the realizing how this has been used. And well, once you see a copy, you are lost, and you simply want to have one. And that's one of the many examples that it's not just about, like I said, not just about fine art in photography that we are looking for, but it's especially after for things like this. And that's the adventure of finding out about how photographs have been used. And so that's just one of the many examples that will be in the 2025 show on American photography in a little display. So that's one of the items.
And they all have that same arrow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's so
Left
funny.
or right, and with a little text what to look for after 1.5 mile, go left or so. Maybe we should try it one. Well, the situation will have completely changed, of course, but it would be nice to try to reconstruct the whole itinerary. Yeah.
I want to move a little bit into toward more contemporary work, because you have in June, right? There's a show called New Horizons, Contemporary Photographs at the Rijksmuseum, and I believe that it also has to do with this blurring of boundaries a little bit between documentary photography and fine art photography. I'm not sorry. I don't know if this particular Vivian Sasson is. I can turn to you, is in the show, but
It is.
yeah, that's what I thought. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what's in that show.
Well, it's been a lot at least black and white photography for the 20th century, and then we have this annual photo commission, and we'd seen it changing within 5 years, somewhere around the year 2000. So it's interesting to collect that field as well, and things come into the house. So we don't actually collect contemporary photography, but still series come into the house. So this is a series Viviane Sasse did in Suriname, which is of course interesting because we have all these bodies of work from Suriname, from early photo albums, a very early daguerreotype of a black couple, and so on, and it grows and grows. So for our Modern Times show, she really wanted to donate this series to the museum. So we were amazed at these beautiful color photographs. So in the show we will have color photography, a small selection of what has been added for the last 15 years or something. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. So it's strange to not collect it. Huh? I mean, we're not a museum of modern art. Right. We are a museum more in a classical way. But still for us it's interesting to find new things, and the Dutch History Department had a big show on the relationship with South Africa, and there were 2 photographs by Peter Hugo in it, and they were wonderful as well. So we selected one of those as well for the show. So it will be a small selection, a first a glimpse of what's coming in the house and coming into the collection as well.
Great. I don't think we have any images from this, but I just wanted to mention this acquisition in 2020 of, I think, 8,000 prints and 3,000 contact sheets by Ed van der Elsken. Can you say something about that and what that means to the museum?
Yeah, Van der Elske is one of the most important 20th century photographers in the Netherlands. You might have seen his work here and in Paris Photo at the booth of Greenberg's, because Greenberg's Howard has, I think, 3 boxes full of Van der Elske prints. And my first encounter with Van der Elske was in 19 88, and then he was very sick. But I wanted to include some of his prints in my show on Dutch post-war photo books. And shortly after the show, he telephoned and he said, Mattie, can't you buy photographs for for his wife and his son? And so I still worked in Den Haag, and I went there, and he was so sick. He had sculpted his own bed and was making sort of a goodbye movie. And so I said, Ed, we really want to have vintage prints. I'm sorry, but I don't take the later prints. And then he had to pull himself up again, you know. And then I had made a wonderful selection, which is now in the collection of the Stedelijk Museum. And then I thought I had seen it all, but we hadn't seen it all. And all people I talked to, so my colleagues from the Stedelijk Museum, they said, no, I've seen, let's say, 800 photographs, and I had seen, yeah, I think 10, 12 boxes or something. And then 2 years ago, what was it, 2019, I guess, his widow telephoned the museum, and she said, I'm prepared to bring over the collections to the Rijksmuseum, what is left. So Hans and I, we went looking for it, first 400 photographs, then 800 photographs. Then our director, Taco, he went over there, and they really had a good connection, Anneke and Taco. And Taco said, if we are going for Van der Elske, we should be able to look at it all. So in the end, we ended up with 8,000 photographs. All the contact sheets, and of course the negatives were already in the Nederlands Fotomuseum in Rotterdam. So we said to Anneke, okay, we take the 8,000 photographs, but the contact sheets should go to Rotterdam, where the negatives and the color slides were kept. And of course, they are specialized in Rotterdam in conservation of negatives and color slides, and we are more specialized in conservation of paper and so on. So Hinde Haast, our new Van der Elske curator, she works on it now. And in 2026, there will be a huge show. But in the COVID period, Taco said, okay, this is an important a new acquisition, a new Dutch master, but then a photographer from the 20th century. Can you make an exhibition when the museum reopens, you know, in this crazy years, closing, opening, closing, etc. So many people from the Netherlands were still able to see what we acquired. So there were dummies of photo books never seen, and a lot of material. So it's good now to have the complete overview and to be able to make a proper exhibition. And so we now also have his later prints, so it will also be a reference collection. Like we collect all the states of the Rembrandt prints, we will have all the states of the Van der Elske prints, and for people in the future to make a proper study.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I thought since we're at AIPAD, it might be nice to ask each of you if there had been a particular treasure that you found at a previous AIPAD fair. And so this was yours, right,
Yeah,
Mattie?
this was mine. This was a few years ago, and Victoria knows. We stood together in the booth of David Winter, and then I saw this and I thought, wow, what's this? Is this Andy Warhol or what's it? But it was 1916, and it was from a candy salesman's big book, a catalogue of traveling. He was a traveling salesman, and he traveled around with this book with all these images of candy and hand-colored, and so that's one of my my favorites. Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
and I think this was yours, one of yours.
Yeah, this is Herbert Matter, a Swiss-born American photographer and designer mostly. So this was meant to be on the cover, and it indeed made the cover of a magazine, but I forgot which one. But it's a fairly large print, and it's simply stunning. I mean, very often people ask us, how do you choose, how do you decide? And in the end, there's no proper answer to that. We have to, we have to agree among ourselves, and most of the time we do. But it's the eyes that do the work. I mean, there's no mathematical formula for why a certain photograph should be in a collection or not. We have to like it or think it's important, and that's of course very subjective, but this was simply a great photograph, and the best answer to the question what is a good photograph is it should be irresistible, and this one simply was irresistible. We saw it at AIPAD in 2014, and we simply had to have it, and that's the main reason it made it into the collection.
Do you have interests that mostly overlap, and are there certain areas that each individually you really are interested in?
We have a lot of areas which don't overlap. But we've been working together now since the beginning of the 1990s. I hardly dare to tell. But of course we have different interests and topics we work on. Yes, and sometimes many times we work together. We always work together on the exhibitions and making the selections and so on. Yeah, but we do things separately as well.
Yeah, but we have this unwritten rule that we at some point established, that if we are talking about a photograph to acquire it or not, we have to agree among ourselves, and even if then one of us is a bit grumpy about the other one not seeing it, you turn around and you will see another masterpiece, and there's so much out there. I mean, and you tend to forget about the things you didn't get, either because someone else bought it earlier or went higher.
I never forget about
Okay, okay.
Which didn't
that's
make it.
yeah. Okay, that tells a lot about our personalities. Maybe I try to forget, and after a night's sleep. But so we sometimes disagree, and then it's off. I mean, we have to agree among ourselves. We have to be convinced, both of us. Otherwise, we won't buy it, and I think that works well. And there's so much out there, you can't afford that luxury of only buying what the two of you agree upon. And yeah, so that's the main rule we have to work. And maybe that explains why we are a couple in this way and working so well for such a long time.
We might have time for maybe one or two questions. If anybody has a question.
Yeah, I'm curious about attribution when you talk about vernacular photographs, because as you used the word masterpiece a few times, and I'm thinking also museums typically invest a lot of their reputation in masters, and I'm thinking most of the most wonderful photographs, which would be identified as vernacular, you don't know who made them. Does that affect your collection?
No, not at all. I mean, it's the image that does it. I mean, and if it's anonymous, it's anonymous. It's a good photograph. It's a good photograph. We have Vermeer. So the talk about masterpiece, we'll leave it to that, to the 17th century paintings. We have, well, our fair share of masterpieces in the collection, even if it's without or outside the photography department. So no, it's of course, and if it has a big name attached to it, it's simply more expensive than if it's a vernacular photograph. But they can be as fascinating as a masterpiece, and that's why we are not bothered by the question, is there a name to it or not? It's about the photograph itself, how it has been functioning, etc. And I mean, so this little guide, the photo auto guide that I bought, there's no name to it, but who cares? I mean, it's a great item. So no, we're not bothered by that.
That's a wonderful approach.
Thank
But
you.
our colleagues do it for centuries. I mean, in the first prints, you call them the Master of Leiden or the Master of Haarlem or whatever. So we can call these photographs the Master of this or that, but we haven't come up with names like that.
Well, the
Yeah.
mass of the unpaved Chicago-New York route or so.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so that's well.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering, for those of us who are going to be have the good fortune to be in Amsterdam next week, if there is a photography show at the Rijksmuseum on Thursday.
That's the wrong question to ask us. Last 2 weeks ago, we had a family evening in the museum, and we were allowed to take 2 members of your family. So I had to disappoint 2 of my children; they couldn't come. And then we went away and put our coats in the wardrobe. And my husband, he was teasing me, and he said, "Matt, where are the photographs? I don't see them." So our gallery has turned into a wardrobe,
A locker room.
a locker room, and but we will be there again in summer when the Vermeer show ends. So
We can't wait
are,
for it.
Our photography gallery is in the exhibition wing, which isn't too big, but so that's the problem. And but you will find new shows after the Vermeer show when goes away, and you can always come to Amsterdam to the wonderful library. You should really do that. And you can go to the study room and ask for the boxes and see all the photographs. You can ask for the box Van der Elske, for the box Brassai, for the box Breitner, and you can look at these photographs in our study room. And it's open even on Saturdays in the weekend. So we have a wonderful facility there to have a look at the collections, because photographs are vulnerable, can't be shown all the time. So we ask people, students, researchers, people who come to the museum, come to the study room and ask for the photographs and have a look. So the collection is huge, and you can only show, let's say, 50 or 60 in the gallery, so that's not much. And then they go back in the boxes again, and
There are no tickets anyway for Vermeer anymore, so you'd better wait till June 30 when New Horizons open about modern and contemporary color photography, and do that.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you, Hans and Mattie. And
okay.
We would like to say thank you very much for the Muse collection.